You're ready.
Okay, as chair of the Winnacunnet School Board, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to the executive order 2020-4, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possibilities by video or other electronic means. We are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the Winnacunnet School Board have ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through this platform. The public has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in this meeting through dialing the following phone number: 646-876-9923. Webinar ID number is 952-9661, and or clicking on the listed agenda. Zoom is 9527-961587. Providing public notice of this necessary information by accessing the meeting. We previously gave notice of the meeting, the necessary information for accessing the meeting, including how to access this meeting through Zoom or telephonically. Instructions also provided on the website of SAU 21 office at www.sau21.org. C, providing a mechanism for public to alert the public body during the meeting if there is a problem with the access. If anyone has a problem, please call 603-926-8992 extension 103 or revans@sau21.org. During the meeting, if the public is unable to access the meeting, in the event of the public unable to access this meeting, the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. We will not be doing any votes, so we're ready to start.
You're on mute, Rhonda.
Heidi Terracina.
I'm here with family possibly in it.
Henry Marsh.
Here.
Leslie LaFond.
Here alone.
Mike Rabideau.
Here with some others.
And Tony Delano. Tony, are you with us?
Looks like he's muted.
I've
Hello?
asked. Oh, you are?
Hi.
Okay. Thanks,
Hello?
Tony.
I'm here, family in and out.
Okay. All right. I have the roll call taken.
So let me just say a word by way of introduction and welcome Anthony Lang, who's the newest member of the Hampton Falls School Board and who's because he wanted to sit in on this presentation. So we are very lucky to have Will Phillips and Barrett Christina with us, who just do amazing work on behalf of school boards, and I'll say as a superintendent on behalf of superintendents as well statewide. They've been really gracious with their time over the last 2 or 3 weeks to come and work with, I think this is the 4th of our boards who have new members on roles and responsibilities. And I would just encourage off those conversations, board members to just, ask questions that you have about, the roles and responsibilities of board members and administration and any of those things that come to mind. These are the 2 best people to ask any of these questions of and have a conversation with. So I guess with that, I'll turn it over to Barrett and Will.
Great. Bill, thank you for those kind words. And good evening to the Winnacunnet School Board. Again, my name is Barrett Christina, Executive Director of the New Hampshire School Boards Association, joined with our staff attorney, Will Phillips. I want to thank you for inviting us to this meeting to have a discussion about school board roles and responsibilities. What do the statutes say about the authority of the school board? compare and contrast about what do the statutes and Department of Education regulations say about the role and authority and of the superintendent and administration, and more importantly, how those two mesh and how school boards can work to be efficient, how school boards can work to engage in positive student outcomes, and how the superintendent and administration and the school board can have a positive working relationship. I know some of you probably have seen Will or I do this before, so we bear with you if some of it's a little bit repetitive. I'm going to pull a PowerPoint up here in another minute or so and work through some slides. I believe Rhonda got all those materials to you, if not yesterday, maybe last week. A lot of emails. I forget exactly when that went out. But more than anything, we certainly encourage questions and conversation and dialogue. Normally when we do this in person, we're able to sit down for an hour and a half and have a nice conversation and a nice talk and answer questions. This obviously is a little bit of a different format, but to the extent that we can still make it into a conversation and answer whatever questions, Will and I are certainly happy to do that. I presume we have about an hour or so. I think that's generally what we've been doing. Thank you, Bill. We'll try and get it done by a little bit after 7 o'clock or so, but if we end early, that's fine. And if you would like us to stay late just because there's questions and conversation, we're certainly happy to do that as well too. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, I think, and let's see if this works. Is that working? Somebody just give me a thumbs up, maybe. Fantastic. Alrighty. So again, the first thing that we like to start off with when we're talking about school board roles and responsibilities and the interplay between that of the superintendent's responsibilities, one of the primary concepts that NHSBA tries to get its board members to consider and think of when they're fulfilling their roles as school board members are two basic concepts. One, governance, not management, or governance is not management, and more importantly, and we'll talk a little bit about later, the differences between what constitutes governance of the school district, which is the school board's responsibility, versus what is the management of the school district, which is the superintendent's responsibility, and how he delegates that out to his administrative staff. Another key concept is recognizing that the school board, the entity, the public body, the elected body, has collective authority, meaning that you as a board can only act when you are at a duly called meeting and you have a motion and a vote and a majority of you agree on whatever the motion may be, versus individual authority. And what can you do now that if we have some new board members on the board, I guess maybe about 6 months or so, if we had any that were elected back in March, the notion of what your role is as a citizen when you're in the line at the supermarket, or you're at the ball game for your kids, or responding to social media. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more depth, but two key concepts: governance versus management, and collective authority, not individual authority. So when we talk about governance, the school board, as I mentioned, governs the school districts. The school board's responsibility is not so much to run the schools, but rather to see how schools are run well. And there are various things that we'll talk about a little bit more in depth on how the school board ensures that the schools are run well, rather than running the schools themselves on a day-to-day operational standpoint. Having a clear understanding of these differences can help accomplish positive student outcomes, which ultimately that's what we hope that all school board members in their individual realm and school boards as the entity are striving to do: enhance positive student outcomes. And the school board's role in governance too is to set the vision and the goals for the district and help them fulfill through the oversight of the administration. And how does the board ensure that what are the visions and the goals? Just some examples. Well, school boards have strategic plans. You probably have mission and vision statements, but more importantly, policies, which we're going to talk about in another couple of slides. Conversely, yet completely related, it's the superintendent's responsibility to implement the visions and the goals of the school board and to implement the policies that the school board enacts. Oops, I think I may have skipped one. My apologies. There we go. Get all these on here. We like to show this slide as sort of a compare and contrast, if you will, of what the school board's responsibilities are and how policy making. I apologize, I'm playing around with my screen so I can actually read what's on the slides. The difference in interplay, I'm sorry, my apologies, folks. Alrighty here. The difference in interplay between the governance role and the management role. When we look at Department of Education Rule 303.01, and for the new board members, if you see ED in front of a series of numbers, that stands for Department of Education Regulation, and there's a regulation that talks about the role and responsibility and duties of school boards. And the first one that we do to illustrate the governance and management differences, the school board adopts policies. And this is just one example relative to the recruitment, employment, and evaluation and dismissal of teachers. Conversely, the superintendent nominates all certified staff and and appoints other employees, so on and so forth. See that last line, in accordance with school board policies. And that's really the gist of a lot of the training and a lot of the presentation tonight, is that the school board sets policy and the superintendent implements policy. Related, the superintendent is also authorized to direct and supervise the work of all employees of the district or the districts within the SAU. One easy way to remember the distinction between who has sort of, and this gets back to the day-to-day operations of the school district and the difference between governance and management. The school board has one employee, the superintendent. And obviously you share that, with 4 or 5 districts in SAU 21. I can never remember the exact number. But the school board has one employee, and that's the superintendent. The superintendent, conversely, is responsible for all other employees within the school district or within the SAU, from the assistant superintendent to teachers, to principals, to custodians, to food service workers, bus drivers, if you have, your own bus drivers in the district. But I think that's a pretty good example of trying to identify the differences between governance and management. Relative to the collective authority, as I mentioned this earlier, school board acts only as a collective body, acting upon the will of a majority of its members, and has to be at a duly called meeting. The only inherent authority an individual school board member has is to deliberate and vote on matters at duly called meetings. And obviously a school board can delegate some of its authority to an individual member, most often the chair, right? The chair usually confers with the superintendent to set the agenda. The chair may be given certain authority at the meeting to call the meeting to order, to perhaps assign certain documents on behalf of the district, to be the district spokesperson with the media in the event something were to arise. But how do those come about? How is that authority delegated? Most of it's delegated through policy. Now, obviously, you can do that, as sort of a one-time thing. Bob, why don't you write the letter to the editor on behalf of the district? So Bob's got the authority to do that. But most of those other delegations come through school board policy. Moving on to the roles and responsibilities of school boards, there's a lot of them. Through this presentation, we try to identify, I think, maybe 8 or so that are sort of the key responsibilities of school boards, both from a statutory basis, a regulatory basis, meaning the Department of Education regulations, and as well as perhaps your local policies with some best practice thrown in there as well, too. One thing I like to lead off with when we're talking about the primary responsibilities, this is RSA 189-1A, and again, RSA, the New Hampshire statutes. The school boards have a responsibility to provide an education to every kid that lives in the district. The statute is clear. It shall be the duty of the school board to provide at district expense elementary and statutory education to all pupils who reside in the district until such time as the pupil has acquired a high school diploma or has reached the age of 21. And especially as we're moving into budgets, and we know that when you're developing your budget and you get to the annual meetings, there's obviously a lot of constituencies, parents, teachers, taxpayers, elderly, whoever it may be that live in your community. But just be mindful that the budget that you put forth has to be able to provide for the educational program within the district. Continuing on, a second primary role and responsibility of school boards: set and establish policy. NHSBA repeats this through any of the trainings that we do, whether we're talking about superintendent evaluations, whether we're talking about effective meetings, whether we're talking about best practices. It comes back to policy. So policy, why is policy important? Well, it's the rules of the school. It establishes how your board, the Winnacunnet School Board, wants to see things happen within the district. Policies can sometimes direct specific action. Sometimes they're philosophical statements and guidelines and recommendations and aspirations. They provide staff in the community with the legal requirements of particular statutes or Department of Education rules. But more importantly, I think they create the framework within, for the gist of this presentation tonight, talking about, the work of school boards and how that corresponds and relates to the work of the administration. Policies create the framework within the superintendent manages the district, and the staff discharge their assigned duties. As we talked about, and I think it's coming up on some of the slides here, it is, compares the aspects, I'm sorry. Yeah, so compare the language, nope. Yes, of the duties of the school board and those of the superintendent, pages 2 and 7, if you've got the more, not the PowerPoint, but like the more narrative white paper handout. You'll see a list of school board policy requirements, and then the corresponding superintendent Department of Education regulation talks about the superintendent shall do X, Y, and Z, and they all end in accordance with local school board policy. So the board sets the policy under one set of Department of Education rules. Superintendent implements that policy under the corresponding Department of Education rules for superintendents. Also, just be mindful, 11 specific policies required over 70 positions. I don't know what that's relative to, Will, maybe you can chime in on that. But more than anything, there are about 70 policies that are required by both state and federal law. And anybody that pays attention, and those of maybe the more seasoned school board members know, that list keeps growing every year, doesn't it? More and more. This year, there are another 2 or 3. Last year, there were 4 or 5. So we know that they're just going to keep adding more policies onto school boards. And again, example, the list grows each year.
You want me to, I think that that little thing, just for everybody, everybody's information, you're getting the first rollout of this particular PowerPoint. Barrett has never seen it before. I used it once for a training last week. So I'm taking notes to see where we can improve it a little bit. But that one orange balloon on the last slide that said has required 11 specific policies over 75. That refers to just one single federal set of regulations, uniform grant guidance, which requires 11 different policies. And actually it requires almost 20, but they relate to non-fiscal matters. So anyway, that's what that balloon is. So it requires 11 different policies and 75 at least 75 different provisions within those policies. That's all that was.
Thank you, Will.
Yep.
And I think you're driving now, Will. Do I need to give you permissions or let you share?
Either you do or Rhonda does.
I'll stop sharing.
Okay, and so then Rhonda, I can just share my screen?
Yes, I believe I've already given you that permission, Will.
Woo! So do you see what
there?
Barrett just had as well?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, whoops. Got to put my hands on the steering wheel if I'm going to drive the car. Okay, so your next key role and responsibility is actually very closely related to the first one, It's establish your budget and provide budget oversight. So there's kind of two responsibilities there, but setting your budget is somewhere buried down in here. I have it, and maybe we'll move this around. But if you look at the last piece there, the blue one, proposed budget and the ongoing oversight is the fiscal expression of board policy. You know, I look at budget as being the same as within your house. Your policies are, what do we want to do next year? We would like to go to Hawaii. But then you look at your budget, and your budget says, well, we can either go to Hawaii or we can replace the roof on the shed. So let's do that instead because it really needs to be replaced. And so what you're doing when you're setting your budget is really making choices about your missions and your objectives and your goals. What do you want to accomplish and how can you pay for it? You know, that's really what your budget is about. And you know, it reflects the fiscal responsibility of the board to the taxpayers. Does Winnacunnet have a municipal budget committee or a cooperative budget committee? Yes, it does. Okay, so it works a little bit differently for either single towns that have a municipal budget committee or cooperative districts that have a cooperative budget committee. But even in those districts, a school board has a statutory responsibility to provide a budget. It's a little bit different in that it's the budget committee's budget that gets presented to the voters, but there's, you know, beside the fact that you have a statutory responsibility to do it, there's very compelling reasons for the board to be, you know, deeply involved in working out the budget for the district. One is it's the fiscal oversight that you're providing to management, really getting a feel for, you know, what did you spend last year? Can you reallocate some of those resources? You know, get rid of unnecessary things. And your budget, if it's well prepared, is a compelling statement to, if not your municipal budget committee or your cooperative budget committee, then it is to the taxpayers when it comes time to present, you know, the budget committee presents its budget. And, you know, they cut out 5 things that you as a school board felt were very important for you know, fulfilling the goals and objectives that you've established. So by being well prepared with respect to your budget, you can make a stronger and more compelling argument to your voters as to why you think putting that money back into a budget, amending your budget is, you know, more important. So you have the responsibility to provide the budget, but then how do you oversee the, you know, the fiscal management of the district? Well, there's a couple of statutory provisions that give you ongoing responsibility. So the first is, let's see how I do this, manifest review. So the RSA, I want to say 19723A, which is titled Treasurer's Duties, I believe, includes a opening line, something to the effect of treasurer shall pay such monies as are approved by the board, or if not by the board, then by a subcommittee of the board of at least 2 members of the board. So you have a duty to approve all of the expenditures, the payments before they go, before those payments are made. Now you can do blanket approval for certain types of things. So you have a collective bargaining agreement for your teachers and they all have salaries, and the salary is a, you know, 26 pays or 21 pays, whatever your bargaining agreement says. So those can be pre-approved. You don't necessarily have to dig deep into those each week, and you can approve, allow the treasurer to, you know, probably your payroll is done digitally. Many are. I know a couple of districts that still handle their payroll and do it by paper. And in that case, the treasurer comes in and he signs every check. But the manifest has to be approved by the board or that little subcommittee. And in doing that, depending on how your review process is working, you can see what monies are going out and how that relates to the budget that you prepared. Sometimes, let's see, it can be what, almost 20 months, no, not 20, maybe 18 months before your expenditures at the end of the next fiscal year are actually being made. So that's the first one, is your manifest review and how your board handles that. The next one is line item transfers. When you prepare your budget, both the income component and the expenditure component, these are all guesses. I mean, you're working on your budget now for a fiscal year that is not going to end for another, 21 months. The budget will be approved in March, so that's 15, 16 months before you're done making expenses for that fiscal year. So these are all guesses. You have to decide how much is your parking lot snow plowing line. What's that going to look like? Well, you're in New England during some climate shifting, and are you going to have 40 snow plows, or are you going to have 10 snow plows? Makes a big difference. Obviously, we know that the expenses that every district has incurred throughout the country relative to COVID was something that you didn't forecast back in whatever it was, the fall of, would it be 2018, when you started to work on the budget that ended just this past June. So these are all, you're just making guesses. And because of that, you're going to have a line item for athletic fields, and you're going to have a line item for wherever you have your Chromebooks. And this year, you probably spent less on your athletic fields than you thought you would. I mean, this year, meaning last year, but you spent more on technology than you thought you would because you had to adopt to remote learning. So you have to move that money from athletic line to Chromebook line, and you do that by way of a transfer of appropriation. You have a school board policy that sets out what your board decides is the best way to effectively manage the fiscal operation. And so you might have within your board policy something that gives the superintendent, say 10, 15,000, maybe more, maybe less, where the superintendent can make that transfer. So it has a prior approval from the board, makes the transfer, and then has to report it to the board at the next meeting. And then for transfers that involve more than whatever that threshold is, the administration can't make that transfer until it gets permission from the board. So that's just an example of, where some administrative discretion comes in, but where the board establishes the parameters for that discretion. And then lastly, with respect to fiscal oversight, those are your two statutory pieces, but you as a board do have the right to request financial information as a board, not, individual members, might have a relationship with the BA or something that, it works best for the board if this one person's informed, but it's the board itself that is telling the administration, we need this kind of information at the next meeting or something. So those are the means by which you fulfill your fiscal oversight and your responsibility to prepare a budget. We don't spend a lot of time on the technical requirements, the statutory requirements of budget preparation. We've got, a whole hour and a half that we can talk about that. And Barrett loves to talk about that, but in any event, so that's role number 3. And so, Barrett, back to you. So I stop share, right? There we go.
Barrett, you're muted.
Thank you, Rhonda.
You're welcome.
All right, we talked about the budget stuff. Hire and evaluate the superintendent. We won't spend a lot of time on this, just in having the conversation with some of the other districts in SAU 21. You know, we know that you've got a good superintendent evaluation process. I don't know exactly what it looks like. We don't need to get into that. But obviously the SAU board, the school board, is responsible for hiring the superintendent and conducting an annual or a yearly superintendent evaluation. I don't need to tell you, everybody on the call, I'm sure, gets this. That's where the rubber meets the road, right? That's really what a prime responsibility of school boards, to provide a thorough evaluation, a good evaluation, and that, you know, and looks back, looks forward, establishes some goals. And I know that just in talking with Bill and some of the other school boards in 21, SAU 21, that you've got a process in place. So I don't need to spend too much time on that. But you know, this is how you oversee your superintendent, right? I mean, this is where you really exercise your governance responsibilities. You adopt policies. The superintendent's responsible for implementing those policies. You adopt a budget, or the voters adopt a budget, and the superintendent's responsible for implementing that budget. And that's the oversight. That's the board's responsibility. That's a primary governance responsibility, overseeing, you know, the superintendent's job performance, and the goals that you've set either for him or for the district, and, you know, what other elements may be included in your superintendent evaluation, either your process or your form or whatever it may be. And last, just to be clear, it's a legal requirement. There's a Department of Education regulation that requires superintendents be evaluated annually. And I'm guessing you have a policy that speaks to this. I know every school board policy manual I've looked at has a provision that says you'll evaluate the superintendent's performance on an annual basis. So not just is it a good best practice, obviously, as we would, you know, evaluate any employee in any corporation, but you've got a legal requirement to do so. Back to you, Will.
There we go. So next responsibility that you will have as a board is to conduct various hearings. In almost all of your doings, you as the school board, you are acting in a legislative capacity. You're making broad decisions for policy decisions, budget decisions, some high-level hiring. But those are all considered legislative matters. But at other times, you're called upon to act in what's called a quasi-judicial capacity. And let's see. So in these instances, you're acting as a hearing body, judge, a jury over individual interests. So somebody's either employment interests or their academic interests are at stake. And so for students, you might have expulsion or long-term suspension hearings. You might have manifest education hardship hearings. Those are the most common. There are some other ones. For employees, the most common are dismissals, non-renewals, labor grievances. Labor grievances are slightly different, handled a little differently in some districts, and really are how they're handled is a product of the collective bargaining agreement. But when you're doing a hearing as school board, you're the judge and the jury. You are providing due process to either your students or your employees. So what do we think of in our society when we think about the core requirements of due process? Well, the first is having a fair and impartial judge and jury. And the second one is the ability to hear the evidence and the charges against you and to be able to challenge that evidence, whether it's testimonial or physical or documents. So that, in your function as a school board, you're expected to be fair and impartial, and you're expected to provide a hearing where whoever's interests are at stake has the opportunity to hear that evidence and hear the testimony and to challenge that. So this is one place where it really calls attention to the need for the school board to be respectful of the boundary between administration, management, and school board governance, or in this case, adjudicative capacity, relative to individual employees and individual students. You all at some point either have or will receive a telephone call, or you'll be I don't want to use the word accosted, but approached in the, produce aisle or the recycling center or at the T-ball game, and somebody's going to bring up a complaint, what would amount to a complaint about an individual student or about a individual employee. And it's important that you respond, but what's your function there? Your function really is to help that constituent find the right path to try to resolve that problem. You're not the one who can solve that problem, nor are you the one who can really investigate that. What do I mean by investigate? I don't mean get out your magnifying glass and your funny hat. I mean, you start asking questions about who was in the room when the teacher did this. Did they ever have any, bad interactions before? Or, those types of questions. You're really looking for evidence there. The only information that you need is enough information to know where to redirect that person. And now this is a little bit different when you've got somebody complaining about the food in the cafeteria, or about the potholes in the driveway, or how badly the football team is doing. Well, maybe if they're talking about the coach, that might fall within the first one. But you can engage your constituents more when it's not about individual interests. But when you're talking about individual interests, then that's really the place where you get enough information that you can refer it to the superintendent. And in some cases, you might refer it even down the line, but really your function is to deal through senior administration. You probably have at least one policy, if not two, that sort of talk about communication with employees and how those communications are to travel through the superintendent. Also, what that allows the superintendent to do is make sure that the people subordinate to him are doing the job the way that you as a board and he expects people to do those jobs. In carrying that out, and we do refer to this a little bit later, be familiar with the policies you have in place for complaint resolution. In our sample manual, we have a policy called KEB. I think it's in the large handout that you have. There's some sample policies that appear starting on page 11 of that large handout. They go sequentially with the letter coding. So KEB is complaints about individuals. And if you know that policy reference and you know that that policy is on your website, you get to tell that person, I will pass this information to the administration, and I invite you to go look at our policy KEB, because that will tell you what the next steps would be if you can't resolve that. And so you are helping your constituent there. Hopefully it will be resolved at the lowest level. If it's not resolved at the lowest level, it gives them the roadmap as how to move it up the chain without being hit with obstacles, procedural obstacles. The worst kind are when you have somebody who jumped over a bunch of steps, somebody intervenes higher up the ladder. Somehow it gets to court, and all of a sudden the person's case is getting thrown out because they didn't exhaust their administrative remedies and they didn't follow all the procedures. So, really you're helping them hopefully resolve it more quickly, with less conflict, and preserving their rights in case that couldn't happen. So this separation of your local school board members, what's going on in the community. You are not expected to be, I don't want to say oblivious, but you're not expected to lack all knowledge of a particular case, like you would if you were a juror, especially. You live yours is a slightly bigger community, but these same rules apply throughout the state. We have some school districts that have 40 children in them. Everybody knows everybody, if not related to them. So it's impossible to be ignorant of something that really rises. Most cases that are rising to the level of a school board hearing, there's some information that's floating around everywhere. We also encourage superintendents to provide information to boards on an as-needed basis. We don't want board members to be caught off guard, but it's really an as-needed, what information you need to know. The police came into the building and arrested so-and-so. We're investigating, that kind of thing. But you don't get to know all the witnesses and what the evidence is until you have a hearing and you're sitting there as the judge and the jury. Collective bargaining. You guys have probably one of the most unique collective bargaining structures in the state, because it's a all or nothing. Yeah, there's Bill. Happy to find that out. Is this a big topic of conversation at the superintendent's meetings?
It's come up from time to time.
Yeah, I bet. I really have to hand it to you boards and the administration. The fact that you can ever get any of them passed is really a testament to how well you do it. I had one district that couldn't get a contract passed. First, they couldn't agree on a contract with the union maybe half the time, and the other half the time, when they did agree, the taxpayers shot it down anyway. And that went on for, I think, 7 straight years. So a lot of frustration in there. So the mere fact that you ever get them passed is really quite a thing. Let's see. So when you do a collective bargaining agreement, in most districts, the board itself is the party that negotiates it and is the signatory on behalf of the district. The board designates a representative negotiating team that in most districts has at least one board member. Sometimes 2 or 3, depending on the size of the board. You've got a handful of districts in New Hampshire are like select boards and only have 3 school board members. So in that instance, you always want less than a quorum. So that one would always have just 1 member. And then the rest of the board's negotiating team is comprised either of a lawyer or administration. I know one board that often uses former board members, but in any event, it's the board that is the one responsible for negotiating the contract. One thing that boards sometimes don't really contemplate when they're setting up their negotiating team. Who wants to be on the negotiating team? Well, I don't, because that is one time consuming job and I don't want to have anything to do with it. And so it's a last man standing kind of thing. It's maybe just slightly more favored than policy committee, but it's right up there sometimes. But boards really need to be mindful of who they put on the negotiating team. First of all, you generally want to find an agreement if there is an agreement to be had. You're not required to have an agreement, but if there's one to be had, that means a happier staff, and a happier staff means a happier student body generally, less conflict in the families and in the buildings themselves. But you'll often hear in other contexts that board members don't lose their individual voice. So even though, if you're speaking on behalf of the board, you have to be designated, that authority has to be delegated to you. It doesn't mean you can't talk about school matters, but when you're talking about them, you're talking about them in an individual capacity. And you don't lose your ability to be the center. We don't think that's the best, way for effective boards to operate, but you don't lose that individual voice of yours. However, here's one place where you may, and that is in negotiations, a school board is required to negotiate in good faith. And New Hampshire courts and courts in other states have determined that if you are on the negotiating team and you reach a tentative agreement, when that tentative agreement is then presented to either your board for ratification or to the voters for approval, the cost items, are ultimately approved by the voters. In either of those instances, if you were on the negotiating team, you must support that contract. And your failure to support that contract can be deemed bad faith bargaining on the part of the district. So you really need to be mindful of who you're putting on the on that negotiating team, because they have to be respectful of the tentative agreement that comes out of those negotiations. And also you want to make sure that whomever is on the team is representative of the board's position. I was in the unfortunate situation at least twice in the last few years before I came to NHSBA where, nobody wanted to be on the negotiation team except this one person who had vastly different views than the rest of the board. Well, that meant that one person could decide whether or not to agree to things that everybody on the board would have agreed to. So anyway, be careful about how you pick your teams and make sure it's somebody who's committed to that process. Support the tentative agreement. There we go. And so Barrett, I will stop sharing my screen.
Great, thank you, Will. There we go. All right, moving on. I'm going to move quickly through the next couple of slides, just in the interest of time. We never get to the end, but I want to get to the superintendent's roles and responsibilities a little bit as well too. I'm continuing on a couple of things that seem like common sense, but worth putting in the slides anyway. Communicate with the public, and beyond that, beyond just sort of the public meeting aspects of RSA 91A and public meetings and minutes and all that sort of stuff. It's important, especially during times of COVID, right? NHSBA did a couple webinars back in August, I believe, about school district communication plans, how to keep parents informed, the community informed about what's going on in the district, positive cases, remote instruction, athletics, whatever's going on. And the more the boards can find ways to communicate what's going on, because not everybody's going to go to the meeting, not everybody's going to watch it on Zoom, not everybody's going to attend in person, not everybody's going to read the minutes, but they might flag something on Facebook or social media. They might flag that email that comes through if it's an update from the board or the superintendent. And again, sort of zipping through the last little bit on school board strategic planning, NHSBA strongly encourages that our boards develop a long-term strategic plan that encompasses everything: technology, facilities, budget, student enrollment, staffing, so on and so forth. But the thing I like about the thing that's really beneficial, or the aspect of strategic planning that's very beneficial, is that first sort of indented sentence there. It's effective and to efficient in school board governance. If you have a strategic plan, you know what your meetings are going to look like, and the agenda items of your meeting are going to relate to your strategic plan. Your policies are going to relate to your strategic plan. Your budget is going to relate to your strategic plan. Your superintendent's responsibilities are going to relate to your strategic plan. So to the extent that you have one, fantastic. Make sure it's active and it's living and it's being referred to and checked in on by the board on a regular basis. And if not, I would encourage boards I understand the timing obviously is not great to engage in strategic planning, but under normal circumstances, we would encourage boards to engage in strategic planning or even look at or review your current one. Learning tips for new school board members. I'm going to skip through this again, just in the interest of time. It's in the handout, the longer white paper. So I'll let you read that sort of on your own time. Some sample policies relative to the things that we talked about. And I saw that Rhonda was linking in or giving the code numbers to some of the Winnacunnet policies. So again, these are the NHSBA call numbers. They may be different, but they're usually pretty related, pretty close. Board member authority, role of the board chair, board member ethics, use of electronic communication devices during meetings, employee communications, public complaints, and complaints about personnel. So jumping over to the superintendent's role, and just want to be mindful of the time, about 10 minutes or so. Does that sound about right, folks? Does that sound good? Okay. Earlier on some of the other slides, we talked about the school board's role to adopt policies. There's 75 required policies required by law. That list is growing, every year. They touch on all aspects of school district governance, the board itself, the administration, facilities, staff, students, visitors, parents, so on and so forth. But the superintendent's responsibility, as noted in this Department of Education rule, is to implement and review school board policies, implement policies. And that's, at the end of the day, I think that's really sort of what the roles and responsibilities training NHSBA offers boils down to. The board adopts policy, the superintendent implements policy, and the school board's role in overseeing the superintendent is through the evaluation process. But if you look at all the school board's required policies, and on the white paper, if you flip back and forth between pages 2 and pages 7, you'll see that it says board adopts policy, superintendent does X, Y, and Z in correlation with the board's policy or in accordance with the board policy. But there's a clear link between the school board policies and the day-to-day obligations of the superintendent. The school board and superintendent's function relative to policy, like many other functions, are two-part. Again, implements policy and superintendent implements the policy and advises the boards relative to policy needs. Continuing, one of the second primary roles and responsibilities of the superintendent is to nominate professional staff and appoint all other staff. There's a variety of statutes, RSA 189.39, 189.14a, Department of Education Rule 302. And just to be clear, professional staff basically means any position within the school district that requires certification. So your teachers, your librarians, your guidance counselors, presumably your specialists, to the extent that they have DOE certification. So the superintendent, I think everybody knows the process. Superintendent, the superintendent recommends or nominates professional staff, certified staff to the school board. And ultimately, what does the school board have to do every April? You vote on those contracts, who's getting a contract, who you're going to hire. Relative to other staff, your custodians, food service workers, non-certified positions, the superintendent per statute is allowed to quote unquote appoint other staff in accordance with school board policy. Some boards don't get involved in, the 10-hour-a-week employee. Other boards do. With obviously reporting back to the board, if the superintendent is given that authority. Whatever process you have in 21 or in Winnacunnet, if it's working for you, by all means continue with that. And I think I touched on some of this, the statutory framework. Superintendent nominates, basically recommends a certain person to the board. The board has to take action on that. And I think we talked about this. Superintendent appoints the other staff. And then board policies may use processes similar to the nomination election process for professionals, but may also extend direct hiring authority to the superintendent. Department of Education Rule 302, direct staff. I think I talked about this earlier. The superintendent is, is responsible for all the employees within the district. The school board has one employee, the superintendent. This is, again, from the DOE rule, the superintendent shall direct and supervise the work of all employees and shall have all powers necessary to make such direction effective as outlined in RSA 194C. RSA 194C comes up in a couple other slides. That's a statute legislation that is lists all the requirements of the superintendent and all the responsibilities of the superintendent. These are just some quick examples, again, in RSA 194C, Department of Education rules. School districts are required to employ a qualified person to provide superintendent services. The statutory duties include such operational items as fiscal management. Again, this is the superintendent. Fiscal management, staff, curriculum, and instruction. And if it's one other thing, if look on pages 7 and 9 of the white paper handout, this lists all the requirements that the superintendent is required to follow per RSA 194C4. It's a long list, A through R, what is that, 20 or so subparagraphs. And if you look at that, you'll see that those really are sort of day-to-day operational aspects, oversight of the facilities, making sure payroll is met, compliance with federal regulations, oversight of staff. There's a whole list in there that talk about the day-to-day operations, the management of the school district. And again, what's the board sort of oversight with that? You have policies. If you were to go through that list on pages 7 and 9 of that 7 through 9 of that handout, and look at all those topics of various fiscal management, staff, curriculum, instruction, and all those 20 responsibilities that are outlined in the statute, I bet you have policies that speak to most of them. So it's not like the superintendent's just out there dictating curriculum or just hiring staff or just, moving money around the line items or whatnot. You've got policies relative to all these school district operations. That's the gist of it. There's more information in the white paper, and I think you probably got the full one if I'm not mistaken. We have a couple articles on there from some of our other colleagues at other school boards associations. Some articles that talk about good school board governance and things of that nature. So with that, I don't have anything else to add. Are there any questions? Anything not clear? Anything NHSBA can help the board with?
Barrett, I asked this question in a couple of the other sessions, so I'll ask it here. We have towns represented here that have a fairly active social media presence among people who like to talk about schools, and sometimes people try to draw in school board members into those conversations, or they talk about school board members and what they should do. And so any advice you have on that? I'm sorry, Heidi, I jumped in there and you had your hand up. I'm sorry. I didn't see that until their screen was gone. But any sort of advice from your work with districts across the state?
Sure. I'm going to let Will handle that question, but Leslie first. There was, in addition to the PowerPoint, I believe, Rhonda, it looks like this. If I got my camera on right, I think. No. Was that not included? Did we not get that to you, Rhonda?
Yes,
I apologize.
No, they're in the agenda.
Okay.
And yeah, they're in there. One's called the orientation handout, and then the other one is the right to know overview presentation. They have both of those documents in their agenda.
Okay, so I apologize. I was actually responding to an email. I think I just sent one to Matt, who asked me a question during this. So if I understand correctly, the question, Bill, was, how should board members handle social media generally?
Generally, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we start with this you have to go to the right to know law and have an understanding of the definition of a meeting. This is one part of it. So a definition of the meeting under 91A2 paragraph 1, Roman numeral 1, is a meeting occurs when you have 3 indicia, or if 3 indicia are present, then you have a right to a meeting under the right to know law. The first one is a quorum of school board members or a quorum of a public body, which could be your policy committee. If you have 3 members on your policy committee, then 2 members talking, 2 members could be a quorum of your policy committee. The second thing is that you have the means to communicate contemporaneously. Court decisions in New Hampshire have ruled that even email gives you that ability. So it's not whether you do the communicating contemporaneously, it's whether you are able to. I always think of Clarence Thomas sitting on the Supreme Court, who went years and years and years without ever asking a single question. He was there, and he counts as being there. He could communicate, but he just chose not to. So that the mere fact that you're not communicating contemporaneously isn't the test. The test is, are you able to? And email, text messages, comment streams on Facebook, any type of social media that allows for two-way communications can trigger that second indicia. And then the third one is you're discussing substantive school business. For a school board, anything that has to do with school business is going to fall within what we refer to as jurisdictional matters or official matters. If you're on a committee and you're talking about a quorum of a committee, then it would only be the subject matter of that particular committee. So if you had the two members of the policy committee and they were talking about whether it would be nice to have new band uniforms, that's not within the policy jurisdiction. However, if you had a quorum of board members all sitting around at some gathering, and you started to talk about buying band uniforms, then you would be talking about a substantive school issue. And so the 3 things are quorum, ability to communicate contemporaneously, and then school board business. Now think about Facebook, a comment page. If you've got an active community Facebook group, or several of them, you might have a school one, a town one, a district one. That comment thread, you could literally have hundreds of comments on one that start with one little thread. You put a quorum of board member comments in that thread, and you now arguably have a board meeting. So because of that, that's one of the reasons we really discourage board members from participating in social media commentary. An individual board member can have a social media presence, but really should do so in their own little framework. If it's a community page, we would suggest that you refrain from commenting in that community page, simply because when you pull up that comment thread, you might not scroll back 45 comments and see that one of your colleagues on the board already commented, and then you scroll another 20 back and there's another one. Worse yet, you start responding to each other. You begin to have an interactive discussion with the other board member. But the mere fact that you've got a stream of board members, a quorum of board members communicating in a world that you can communicate contemporaneously, and they happen to be talking about school board business, at least triggers the objective criteria. The other thing is, maybe I could think of 1 or 2 circumstances out of the many thousands that that I'm familiar with, just personally, not just in my professional life, but you're not going to convince anybody on Facebook of anything. It just not going to happen. The hardest thing I think for board members to refrain from doing is, especially, you can look on any comment page and somebody will speak as if they have authority about what happened at the meeting last night, and they weren't at the meeting. Not only were they not at the meeting, they didn't watch the meeting, they didn't read the minutes, they never talked to anybody directly who was at the meeting. No, they're hearing it fifth hand through a friend, and they're posting it on Facebook as if this is the thing that happened. That is frustrating, and it's very hard sometimes to refrain from responding to that. But our recommendation is that you really shouldn't engage in school communications. There are boards that have, if you remember, Barrett talked about at the very beginning, the collective authority of the board. A board can designate a spokesperson. Generally, you're a chairperson. Under most policies, it's the chairperson who's the spokesperson for the board. But I know of one district, very specifically up in the northwest of the state, that appointed a board member to be the, it's not really getting into the comments, but redirecting the comments, simply saying, for an accurate accurate information regarding the school board meeting, the link to the streamed version of the board's meeting is on such and such, and you can find that particular discussion at minute 43. That, so you're not really engaging in the conversation, but you are redirecting to more accurate information. That one particular board I was referencing, they actually appointed 2 people because they tended to have very diverse opinions, and it was a split board, and they thought, well, okay, we're not going to have boards just willy-nilly jumping in, but we will allow, here's the point and the counterpoint. That there's only one board I know that does that, and that's one way to approach it.
So Will, doesn't that though sort of give the appearance that those people speak for the board?
If they're designated as a spokesperson, yes. Yeah, no, that board, I don't want to say that board any more than any other board, because I've just seen some horrendous things. There's one not too far from you guys where, it doesn't matter what happens at the meeting. There's 1 or 2 people in the community who will just go on Facebook the next day and say, here's what the board member said. And the board member definitely did not say what was attributed to them.
It also doesn't matter what happened at the board meeting. It also doesn't matter what happens when you respond. Will said you're not going to change anybody's mind. So
yeah,
I don't.
Right. I'm not suggesting.
I get it. I understand it's frustrating, but there's no benefit to it.
Yeah. It really, the only I think appropriate board response to that is if you did have somebody whose sole function was to redirect, and
Right.
even then. Our suggestion is, have your own, the board. Well, it's best through the district. The district has its own website. The district manages what's on the website. The district does not allow public comment on the website, and really is controlling its message that way. I know that districts have been very active. More in New Hampshire, this is a recent development, but many districts are engaging the services of public relations firms, and the reason is to combat this, but to do it appropriately without violating meeting laws and getting into the sort of the dirty discussions that some of, unfortunately, your constituents are having. The screen moved. Did Bill still here? Did Bill have any more questions? There you are. You're up there now.
Yeah, I know. And I'm sorry, I cut Heidi off. She had her hand up. I know she had a question as well.
Yes, Heidi.
Okay, so, and I appreciate all that you just shared. That is great information to have. I attended, actually, I think it was a meeting this spring, and a lot of this information sounds a little familiar, but it's great to have it be reinforced here. So my question is, so an internal question, internal within the board. So I guess my question is, because I know we have to be very careful about communicating with each other. And I guess I'm not even quite sure how to word it, but sometimes I'll send an email out because there's something that, and I know it can't be specific, it's maybe very general. And I don't know if it needs to go to the chair. I don't know if I send it to the chair and the co-chair. I don't know if I send it to everybody, but then if I send it to everybody, then it becomes, something, a quorum or something, and we can't do that. If I have questions or something, do I just go to the superintendent? Like, I'm not sure.
Sure, I can chime in on that, Heidi. And you're just talking about it general, you were at a meeting and you want some clarification on something type of question, right? I mean, I think a best practice, and you may have policies that speak to this, and part of it just may be tradition or culture in a district or an SAU. Let me ask you this, do you own a telephone?
Yes.
Use the telephone instead of sending a text or an email. That's always the safest way. I get people are, busy and, I know, and I get that we just communicate via email and text message these days. I get that. If you're not sure, call your superintendent or call your board chair and let them sort of walk you. And, you may be, they may have a better sort of different angle on the issue or the question that you may have. And if you're talking about, if it's something relative to a matter that the board has oversight, authority, governance, power to act upon, do not send that to the full body of the email or to the full board, to the full body, because it's easy to hit reply all, and the next thing you know, you're engaged in communication, discussion, deliberation over email. I always say when we do this in person, and we're at our new school board member orientation in Concord, where we have 120 new school board members, and they get that question, I say, you're going to have questions because you're a new school board member. If you walk out of a meeting and you're not quite sure what happened or how or why or what, call your board chair, call the most seasoned member on the board, or call the superintendent. And if you're not sure if it can go to all, I would recommend the board chair and with a CC to the superintendent to keep everybody on the same page. You're not invoking the quorum requirements. And then if it somehow needs to be an issue that we need to bring the full board into, that can happen when we're doing agenda setting or at the next meeting or whatever it may be.
Okay, thank you.
Does that help? Was that helpful?
Yeah, yes, it's
It's Leslie, or I'm sorry. Yeah, Leslie.
Yeah, a quick question. It's kind of piggybacking on Heidi's is, and especially through COVID, we got a lot of emails sent to the board.
Yeah.
And so what we were doing, and I noticed a lot of us were doing it, we're just sending back saying, we're in receipt, thank you very much. And then unfortunately what happened is with one of them, then they said, that's not what we want, answers or whatnot. It got nasty and it was whatever. I guess my question is, should we still be doing that? Because to me, we need to acknowledge that they've,
absolutely,
come to us, but yet we have to
absolutely
say it's out of our realm or something. But, it started
sure
to get nasty when, with one of them that just got
right.
granted with the times, but.
Yep. A couple thoughts on that. And we certainly hear that from school boards all across the state. Joe Citizen emails all 7 school board members. Which is, again, getting back to policy and procedure. You might want to have a policy that says that the board chair or whoever is authorized or designated to be the person to respond. So everybody saw it. Everybody saw the email that came in from Mr. Jones or from Mrs. Smith. But the 7 of you need to, or 5 of you, 5 board member board, 7 member board.
5.
You need to identify who's going to be the one responding, because
Okay.
what you don't want is, you and Heidi hitting reply at the same time, and there may be a different response or a different interpretation of the inquiry. Agreed, you have to be responsive.
Right.
If that email comes to you as an individual board member and not the rest of the board, I think the same process. I think you talk to your board chair and your superintendent and see who wants to reply. One second, Mr. Marsh. Just I got one more point to say on this. I have seen some school boards when I don't have an opinion on this yet because I haven't given it too much thought. I've seen some school boards in New Hampshire, instead of everybody having their own individual email, school district or SAU email, they have one email, Winnacunnet at WinnacunnetSB@SAU21.org, but it goes to everybody. So if somebody emails that, it can be filtered out to your personal email. So everybody gets it, but only one person is responsible for responding. So you eliminate the way Heidi gets an email, Tony gets an email, Leslie gets an email, with people not necessarily being on the same page.
Mhm.
Is that helpful, Leslie?
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Mr. Marsh?
Just real quick, what's occurring here, I think, is that each of the board members represent a community,
Right.
as opposed to
Yeah.
one community. So the people feel that they own that board member. If they live in Northampton,
Right.
Hampton Falls, then that's the person they're going to contact and want, an answer. And what Leslie was mentioning is that the board members, just a nice little note back to say thank you, and then it's transferred to the superintendent. And he's been answering, and I really feel sorry for some of the nastiness that's been put to both the board members and to the superintendent. But, you wear the big hat, that's what happens.
No,
Excuse me, Leslie, but Leslie's wearing the big hat today. But
you raise a good
just wanna
point
chime in.
about just
Sorry.
the nature of a cooperative school district. The citizens of Northampton are going to reach out to their Northampton rep, and so on and so forth. But with that, I get that you were elected by your community. I get that, but everything's at large, but each town gets a seat. Gotcha. Okay. So the point with that is you represent Winnacunnet. You are that town's representative on the Winnacunnet School Board, but your oath of office, if you will, is to Winnacunnet as an entity and as a school district. And sometimes I understand there can be competing challenges there. It's I don't know if it's unique to New Hampshire, but it's certainly one of the challenges that can arise with respect to a cooperative school district. Any other questions that we can answer? Any other comments, thoughts? We're on the line. We're happy to. Yep, go ahead, Heidi.
If I could, it kind of circles back to what I was talking about before. So let's say as a board, we even need to, because we don't have a designated person that I'm aware of. I'm assuming maybe our chair, but we don't have a designated person to be responding to those emails. So back to my original question was, how would we go about taking care of that without sending emails to one another, which would become a quorum? Is that something put on an agenda?
Yeah, what I think you would do is if the email comes to you and not the rest of the board, I think you reply back and you say, "Dear Mr. Smith, thank you for your email. I'm forwarding this to the board chair and superintendent. I trust they can get you the information or the answer you need. If they don't hear back from them, please shoot me another email." I mean, that's generally what we do. And in your reply, you copy them. You copy the board chair and the superintendent. And if they don't get back to you, I mean, this is the other part of, sometimes I bring this up during when we're talking about superintendent evaluations. If they don't get back to that constituent, you're going to hear about it because he's going to email you back again. And then you call Bill and you say, "Mr. Smith has sent me 3 emails and in 5 days about the playground issue. Can somebody please get back to him with an answer? And then you remember that when you have to evaluate the superintendent. Is that fair, Bill? I mean, is
That's No, that's fair.
Anything else, Heidi? I hope that was
That's
helpful.
all for me. Thank you.
Great. Mr. Marsh?
Yes, in the previous profession that we were told, instructed to answer that email within 24 hours or you've lost the customer. And I want to compliment to Dr. Lupini. He does that.
Yeah.
And I think board members have referenced this or had the reference from people saying, wow, he got back to me within a day. And I want to compliment Dr. Lupini on doing that because it is important. When someone takes the time to email, call, that you better get back to them within 24 hours or better, the end of that business day.
Yeah.
Or you've lost that person.
Yeah. Even if it's just to respond, thank you, I got your email, I'll be in touch when I can, or, I'm looking into your answer or whatnot. You don't always have to have the answer, but you have to at least be responsive and acknowledge receipt of the inquiry and the communication. Anybody else? Going once? Going twice? Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Barrett and Will, thank you very much for the presentation. I sat through the Seabrook one,
Yeah.
and you've polished this one. You can definitely take this one on the road. It's very informative. It's much broader, and I think it hits all the important points. So kudos.
Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate that. All righty. If you give me one more minute, thank you again to the Winnacunnet School Board for inviting NHSBA to be a part of this. We're always happy to provide whatever training services, policy assistance, legal information, whatever we can do to assist to assist our school boards and the Winnacunnet School Board during these challenging times. We know at NHSBA that each of you are doing every single thing you can every single day to try and manage the chaos that is upon our public schools right now. So while the public,
chaos?
What's that?
Are we in chaos? I had no idea. No idea.
So, but anyway, I know it's tough. It's tough with parents. It's tough with teachers. It's tough with community members. But we are grateful for all your hard work at the local level. You guys are the ones that are keeping the schools running. So, thank you with that. Thank you for having us, and I'm going to sign off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Barrett. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a good night.
Well, and to the board, thank you for the board members and for this school. You guys are rocking it.
Thanks, Leslie. Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks for coming, Anthony. We'll be in touch to
Thanks
talk.
for having me. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Welcome, Anthony. Have fun with it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Be prepared for anything.
Don't talk him out of it now.
Thanks a lot, everyone. I'm looking
All right,
forward
good
to it.
night.
Take care.
Night.
All right, good night.
Yeah.